It was a quiet Sunday morning, and the golden light spilled through the kitchen window just the way I liked it, catching on the edges of my teacup and dancing across the counter where a plate of warm cinnamon rolls waited to cool. I had no plans that day beyond the comfort of my own routine, and at 58, I found peace in those simple rituals. I was alone but not lonely. The house had long ago settled into its quiet rhythm after the children moved out and George, my late husband, passed 5 years prior, so when I heard a gentle knock at the door, I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Maybe it was Martha next door coming to borrow sugar or return a dish. I didn't even bother to fix my robe or check my hair in the mirror as I crossed the living room. I opened the door with a smile, ready for a neighborly hello, but it wasn't Martha. It was Ryan, Denise's son. Denise being one of my dearest friends from way back, and Ryan, well, he was a boy I'd watched grow up alongside my own daughter, only he wasn't a boy anymore. He stood taller than I remembered, lean and weathered like someone who'd been carrying more than just the weight of his backpack. His eyes met mine, and for a second, all the years seemed to vanish, and I saw that same boy who used to sit at my table after school, snacking on cookies and teasing my daughter. But now his smile was different, quieter, older. Auntie Mara, he said, that same old nickname he used as a kid. I hope I'm not intruding. And of course I told him no, never, and ushered him inside with a warmth I didn't realize I'd missed, until I heard myself say, "You look tired. Sit down. I'll make tea." He followed me to the kitchen, and I poured the tea and offered him a cinnamon roll, and he sat with that kind of weight people carry when life's gone off course. He didn't dive right in. He just held the mug for a while, warming his hands on the porcelain and staring out the window like he wasn't sure where to begin. Finally he said, "I didn't know where else to go." And something in the way he said it made me stop mid-stir at the stove. I sat down across from him, waited, listened as he explained how he'd driven across 2 states after a breakup that felt more like an unraveling, how he'd been sleeping in his car for a couple nights and couldn't bring himself to go back to his mom's place yet. "I remembered your porch light," he said. "It was always on, even when no one else's was. I used to think of it like a lighthouse." And that did something to me, something I didn't expect. I offered him the guest room without hesitation, and that first night I heard the creak of the floorboards as he turned restlessly in bed, and I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering why my heart was suddenly so aware of his presence. The next morning we slipped into a quiet routine. He helped me weed the garden, fix the screen door, carry in groceries. We didn't talk about anything heavy, but we talked, and there was comfort in that, in the shared silences too. Something began to shift a few days in. I was pruning lavender when he came up beside me, reaching for the clippers without a word. Our hands brushed and I felt it. Not the awkwardness of something wrong, but the jolt of something unspoken. When I looked up, he was already looking at me, and in that glance there was gratitude, yes, but also something more, something I couldn't name and didn't want to. "Not yet. I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable," he said, sensing my pause. "You're not," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. He smiled, and the look lingered, not inappropriate, just unexpected. That night I couldn't sleep again, not from confusion or fear, but from the sheer wonder of feeling something I thought was gone for good. We kept moving through our quiet days, organizing the attic, going through old photo boxes. One afternoon we sat on the floor, looking through a 1987 album, and laughed at our hair, our clothes, the innocence in our eyes. "You were beautiful," he said, pointing at a photo of me in a red dress, and I laughed it off. "I was young," I replied, but he shook his head. "You still are." And when I met his eyes I knew he wasn't playing. He meant it, and it caught me completely off guard. He tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers warm against my cheek, and I didn't pull away. "I couldn't. I don't want to make things complicated," I whispered. "Maybe they already are," he said, and we just sat there in that attic, two people suspended between who they were and who they were becoming, and I began to think, just maybe, this story wasn't going to unfold the way I thought it would, and that might be exactly what I needed. When I woke up the next morning, the bedroom was filled with a soft, golden light that streamed through the curtains like a quiet promise. I turned my head, and there he was, Ryan, still sleeping beside me, one arm loosely draped across my waist, his breathing slow and deep, his face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since he first arrived. And in that moment, watching him, everything felt suspended in a kind of peace I hadn't known for years, not since George, not since the children were small and life still felt full of movement and noise. I lay there a while longer, listening to the rhythm of his breath and the birds beginning to chirp outside the window, wondering how something so unexpected could feel so natural, so quiet, so right. Eventually I slipped out of bed without waking him, pulled on my robe and padded into the kitchen. The kettle hissed gently as I warmed water for tea and stirred the oatmeal on the stove. The scent of cinnamon and apples filled the room, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the echo of loneliness following behind me. I set 2 bowls on the table, poured the tea, and just as I was about to reach for the honey jar, I heard his footsteps behind me. "Good morning," he said, voice still thick with sleep. And when I turned, he was standing there barefoot, wearing that old gray t-shirt and the softest look in his eyes. "Morning," I replied and smiled, sliding a bowl toward him. We ate quietly at first, like we were both still catching our breath. And then slowly, conversation returned. Gentle things, nothing heavy. How he used to hate oatmeal as a kid. How he always liked the way this house smelled like lemon and books. It was comfortable, easy, and yet beneath that surface, I could feel something new settling in, something fragile and tender and growing by the hour. Later that afternoon, I was folding laundry in the sunroom when my phone buzzed, and I glanced down to see a message from Denise, Ryan's mother. She wrote, "Hey, haven't heard from you in a bit. Hope everything's okay." Ryan mentioned maybe stopping by, as he reached out. And in that moment, the warmth of the sunlight felt a little heavier, like a reminder that this wasn't just a story about me and him. This was about others too, people we both loved, people who didn't yet know what we had shared. I showed him the message that evening, sitting across from him on the porch while the sun dipped low. He read it slowly and then looked up at me with something like guilt in his eyes. "I should have told her," he said quietly. But I didn't want to deal with the questions, the assumptions. I wasn't ready. I reached for his hand without thinking. "You don't have to explain it all right now," I said, "but eventually you will, and she deserves to hear it from you." He nodded. "I know, and I will. I needed a place to breathe first." We sat like that for a while, listening to the hum of the cicadas and the soft clink of wind chimes in the garden. And for the first time, I realized how much space we had carved out in just a matter of days. How something as unexpected as this could feel not just possible but right. That night we didn't talk about what had happened between us physically. We didn't need to. Instead, we read together on the couch, shared a blanket, and fell asleep holding hands like teenagers, unsure of what to call what they were feeling. The next morning, we went to town together for groceries, and though it was ordinary in every way, I noticed how people looked at us, or maybe how I thought they might look at us. Me, nearly 60, and him, easily half a generation younger. But no one stared, no one whispered, and it made me wonder if I'd been carrying my own shame when none was needed. We picked peaches and tomatoes and sunflowers, and when we got back home, Ryan put vases in every room like it was the most natural thing in the world. I watched him as he moved through the house, not as a guest anymore, not as someone just passing through, but like someone who belonged. That evening, we made dinner together, barefoot in the kitchen, jazz playing softly on the radio, and I caught myself laughing louder than I had in years. "I used to dream of this," he said, sliding a plate in front of me. "Not this exactly, but a place that felt like home, someone who felt safe. I looked at him, really looked, and for once I didn't think about the gap in our ages or the rules we were breaking in our heads. I thought only of how he made me feel. Visible, valuable, seen. We sat on the back porch after dinner, a light breeze brushing our skin, fireflies flickering in the grass, and I turned to him with a question I had to ask. What happens when you go back? I meant to say it gently, but my voice cracked at the end, because I knew this couldn't be a dream forever. He was quiet, thoughtful, then said, I don't know yet, but I'm not running from this. I don't want this to be a passing thing, Mara. I want this to be real. And in that moment, under the dim porch light and the early stars, I realized that I did too, not because it made sense, not because it was easy, but because it had grown from truth and care and mutual respect. And those things don't come around often, not at this age, not in this way. So I reached for his hand and held it tight, and we sat like that, saying nothing more, letting the night settle around us like a quiet promise that whatever came next, we would face it together. The morning after our conversation, the house felt different, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted even though so many questions remained unanswered. Ryan was already awake when I slipped out of bed, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the garden wake up under the soft sun. He smiled when I joined him, that smile that made all the noise in my mind quiet down for a moment. We talked about small things at first. The weather, the neighbor's cat that always tried to sneak into my flower beds, the music playing on the radio. But beneath those words, there was a steady current of something deeper, something unspoken yet understood. Over the next few days, Ryan began to settle in, helping around the house, working in the garden, fixing things that had been neglected for too long. But it wasn't just the chores. It was the way he made me feel seen and needed, alive and even beautiful again. One afternoon, while we were pruning the rose bushes, our hands brushed again, this time longer, and I didn't pull away. His eyes met mine with a tenderness that stopped my breath. Mara, he said softly, I don't want to scare you or mess things up. And I shook my head. You're not, I whispered. I'm just scared of how much I want this. Those words felt heavy and true in the warm summer air. Later that evening, as the sun set and painted the sky with soft pinks and oranges, we sat on the porch swing, sharing stories from our past, laughter spilling between us like a balm. I told him about George and the early days of my marriage, the dreams I'd had and the ones I'd lost along the way. He told me about his own struggles, the heartbreak that brought him here, and the hope he still held on to even when everything seemed dark. In that exchange of memories and dreams, the distance between our ages felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge, connecting two souls searching for connection and understanding. One night after dinner, he surprised me with a slow dance in the living room, music soft and low, his hands gentle on my waist, mine resting on his shoulders, and for a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the warmth between us, the beating of two hearts learning to trust again. We never rushed, never pushed, but the tension between us was electric, a promise of something unfolding slowly and beautifully. As the days turned into weeks, we built a fragile routine of companionship and quiet passion, each moment layered with respect and care. Ryan never pressured me, and I never doubted his sincerity. And though I knew the road ahead might be complicated, even messy, I felt ready to walk it. With him, hand in hand, the hardest part was telling Denise, his mother. But when Ryan finally did, something unexpected happened. She listened, she asked questions, she didn't judge, and while it wasn't easy, it was real, and that made all the difference. Sitting here now, writing this story for you, I realize how life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it, how love can bloom in places we thought were closed off forever, and how sometimes all we need is a little courage and an open heart to discover a new beginning. So thank you for listening, for sharing in this journey with me, and if you've enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories like this, because the best chapters of our lives are sometimes the ones we never saw coming. The days that followed Denise's quiet acceptance felt like stepping into a new world, one that was both familiar and yet entirely unknown. Ryan and I moved carefully, savoring each moment, but also aware that we were breaking molds that many might not understand. The house, once still and echoing with memories of the past, now hummed softly with life again, his laughter mixing with mine, the scent of fresh coffee in the morning, the warmth of shared blankets at night. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were moments of doubt and fear, the kind that crept in when silence stretched too long or the future seemed too uncertain. But those moments passed, replaced by a growing trust that bound us closer. One afternoon, as summer waned and the golden light stretched longer across the garden, we sat beneath the old maple tree, its leaves whispering in the breeze, and I looked at Ryan, really looked, at the man he was and the boy he once was. The way his eyes held resilience, softness, and something like wonder. "Do you ever think about how this started?" I asked, my voice barely above the rustling leaves. He smiled, a little sadly. "I remember feeling lost," he said, "like I was drifting without an anchor. And then your door opened, literally and figuratively, and it felt like I could breathe again." I reached out and took his hand, the roughness of his palm against mine grounding me in the moment. "I never expected this, Ryan," I confessed, "but I'm so grateful for it." He squeezed my hand gently. "Me too, Mara, me too." As the weeks turned into months, we built a rhythm that was uniquely ours. Mornings spent gardening and sipping tea, afternoons filled with quiet talks and shared meals, evenings where we danced slowly in the living room or sat on the porch watching stars emerge one by one. Through it all, I discovered parts of myself that had been buried beneath years of routine and loss. I found courage I didn't know I had and a joy in connection that felt like coming home. Ryan's presence was a balm, a reminder that age was just a number, and that the heart's capacity for love never truly diminishes. One rainy afternoon, as the drops tapped softly against the windows, we curled up with old photo albums, our fingers tracing memories captured in faded prints. "You've given me more than I ever thought possible," Ryan said quietly, looking up from a photo of his childhood, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "And you've given me hope," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. That night, as the rain continued to fall, we talked about the future, the uncertainties, and the possibilities. Neither of us had all the answers, but together we had a promise to be honest, patient, and brave. I told him about my fears, the whispers of society, the awkward glances we might face, and he reassured me with words full of kindness and determination. "We face it all together," he said, and I believed him. There were challenges, no doubt, and sometimes I wondered if the world was ready for a love like ours. But then I would look at Ryan's face, open, honest, full of care, and I knew that what mattered most was not what others thought, but what we felt, the way our hearts connected, the way we respected each other's stories and fears and dreams. As autumn painted the trees in fiery reds and golds, we planted bulbs in the garden for spring, a symbol of hope and new beginnings, and I realized that this chapter of my life was one I wanted to keep writing, not in spite of my age, but because of everything that had led me here. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living fully, deeply, and with an open heart, and that perhaps was the greatest gift of all. So if you're listening to this and wondering if life can surprise you yet again, I hope my story gives you a little light, that no matter where you are or how old you might feel, there is always room for love, for growth, for connection, and that the best chapters are sometimes those that come when you least expect them. Thank you for sharing this journey with me, for opening your heart to this story, and remember, your story is still unfolding, and you hold the pen.